Howdy, welcome to John's D&D vlog. This is Jonathan Scott. This is my 50th episode, 50, so I thought I would do something special this time. This episode I'll be focusing on the life of Dave Arneson. He seems to have been the main guy responsible for the game we all enjoy today. So I was going to look into his life a bit and explain what I can explain. You might want to also watch episode number 40. It's my episode on D&D history. I'm going to have to repeat myself a little here, but I'll be trying my best to not do so you may find watching episode 40 helpful. We are now at almost 2,000 subscribers. I was going to wait until we got to 2,000 exactly, but I had some free time now and I didn't feel like waiting, so thanks everyone. It's nice to know that I'm not just some weird guy talking to myself in an office. I much prefer knowing that I am just a weird guy talking to myself in my office and that almost 2,000 others are listening in. For some reason that makes me feel better. Thank you. I'll be using the following sources of information for this vlog primarily. 3 books. Of Dice and Men by David E. Walt, Empire of Imagination by Michael Whitwer, and Playing at the World by John Peterson. By the way, this last book, Playing at the World by John Peterson, it's a monster of a book, and I was going to read the whole thing before I did this, but it was just more than I could deal with the time I had available, so I've only read the parts that were listed in the back index. It's a monster of a book, and I applaud the guy for having written it, but it'll be a while before I can tackle the entire thing. But it's worth the time. I'm also going to be using one following website specifically, and it's just a really good biography that somebody wrote on Dave Arneson. The last source that I'll be mentioning here is this video on YouTube. It's called The History of D&D and 12 Treasures. The person here, John Peterson, shows a whole bunch of artifacts from the early days of D&D. It's really interesting. I suggest you check it out. This is the second time I posted this episode. The first time I posted it was back in 2017. Not long after I posted it, I was honored to receive this comment from someone who states that he is Major David Wesely, the man who created role-playing games. I don't actually have any proof that he really is who he said he was, but I believe it, and so I'm going to accept it and use this info in my video as well. When I'm done with the history, I'm also going to show you a bunch of the books that he made in his life. I don't have a lot of money to show you everything, but I can at least show you some. Here we go. The biggest problem I had researching this was that when it comes to Dave Arneson, there's not a lot of information out there on him, right? So when it comes to Gary Gygax, everybody knows everything about him. They know where he was born. They even know his address when he was growing up, right? But, I mean, when it comes to Dave Arneson, nothing is really written about Dave that doesn't specifically apply to role-playing games or to war games. If you want to find out anything else about Dave, aside from that information, nothing's really available. But I'll do what I can. As I said, we don't know much, but here's where we can begin. He was born in St. Paul, Minnesota on October 1st, 1947. In his teens, Dave's parents bought him this game. It's called Gettysburg, and it was first published in 1958. Dave's parents gave it to him, though, in the early 60s. He fell in love with it, and he found a bunch of other kids around him and taught them to play it. They all really got into it. At the time, some game companies offered publications to their customers, newsletters. They were usually advertising for future products and such, but some of these companies began to offer space in the back of their newsletters for players to find new opponents, right? It was common then for local groups to give themselves a name and then issue challenges to other groups in these newsletters. Dave's group called themselves the Centurions. In 1965, when Dave was 17, his group, the Centurions, even went as far as to take the rules of a game that had been published by Avalon Hill and redesign them into something that they preferred. The name of the game that they altered was Tactics, and their variation of it was called Tactics 3. In 1965, David Wesely, the father of role-playing games, who was then just a humble college student, met Dave Arneson, still a high school student, and they began playing war games together along with their other friends. At some point after this, the two Daves entered into several gaming organizations in order to start playing games with a larger circle of people. They found themselves in groups such as the Twin Cities Military Miniatures Group and the Midwest Military Simulation Association. Eventually, a smaller group of them began running games regularly just in Dave Arneson's basement. These games were mostly run by David Wesely. There were a lot of wargaming clubs and organizations around at that time. Gary Gygax himself made a few. I don't feel like taking these clubs too seriously. There were, after all, a lot of them, and they were for the most part just a bunch of teenagers associating with one another trying to find new people to play with. They were all pretty small, so when people talk about the IFW or the Castle and Crusade Society, my inclination is to roll my eyes a little. But it was clubs like this that got Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax together, right? And we wouldn't have the game that we have today had they never met. So I guess all these clubs do have their rightful place in gaming history. In 1966, Dave Arneson began attending Hamline University, a school in Minnesota. Later on, he transferred to and would later on graduate from the University of Minnesota with a degree in history in 1971. In 1967, Dave Wesely went off to attend college in Kansas. While he was there, he began developing a new sort of game. These would later on come to be known as Brownstein games. I'll talk more about these later. In 1968, David Wesely, back in Minnesota, ran his first Brownstein game with Dave Arneson and other friends. In this first game, Dave Arneson died, thereby gaining the honor of being the very first character to die in a role-playing game. So, Brownstein games, what are they? Dave Wesely had a really new idea. His idea was to have players control just a single individual figure on the board. So not a full-fledged war game, but something new. Instead of controlling a full-blown army, you just controlled one person. Wesley's idea was to go very small, and when these games, that he called Brownsteins, started, something happened that Dave Wesely wasn't really prepared for. All of the players had very minute and very detailed desires about what they wanted their figures to do. They began to try to guide their characters in ways no one was used to. These Brownstein games were the world's very first role-playing games. David Wesely would play many of these games with Dave Arneson before he volunteered for the Army Reserves in 1970. David Wesely was now gone, but all of his equipment was still in Dave Arneson's basement. Dave Arneson naturally became the next group leader. Arneson was amazed by what had happened in the Brownstein games. He loved it. So he began to design his own variations of the rules Wesely had showed him. He had been playing very rigid war games for so long. He was really happy about the looseness of the rules these new Brownsteins offered. Plus, they offered him a new idea. It was that the players could attempt to do anything. Up until now, all the war games had a very set list of things that you could try to do, that you could attempt to do. But with this new way of thinking in the Brownstein games, you could literally try anything. So where did this change come from? Was David Wesely just blessed with pure inspiration? Where did this new idea of thinking small and focusing on the actions of just an individual person come from? I have an opinion about this that not many other people seem to agree with, but it's my vlog, and this really is my opinion, so I'm going to offer it here anyway. I think it all stems from Tolkien and his books. They were extremely popular at the time, and his books illustrated something repeatedly to their readers that I believe had a fundamental effect on wargamers. Here's a few examples. In The Hobbit, after Smaug is dead, Bilbo finds the Arkenstone and sneaks out of Erebor. He then uses the stone to avert a war that was about to take place between his companion dwarves, the Elves of Mirkwood, and the surviving men of Dale. The actions of one single individual person affected the outcome of a battle more than did any of the actions of each of the armies themselves. In The Lord of the Rings, in several instances, outnumbered armies had no hope. There were simply too many who were fighting against them, and in each instance, the outcome of the battle was changed because of the efforts of just one person. At Helm's Deep, in the second book of the series, Gandalf rides out on Shadowfax to find the scattered remaining forces of Rohan and bring them back to the battle. The actions of just one person completely affected the outcome of the battle. At the Black Gate, at the end of the third book, the armies attacked merely to give Frodo and Sam the time they needed to finish getting the ring to Mount Doom. There was no hope of success to this. They were far too outnumbered. It was simply just an act of self-sacrifice. Because of the efforts of Frodo, Sam, and eventually even Gollum, though, the ring was destroyed, and the remaining forces of Sauron, who were no longer controlled by him, fled, and the battle was won. In each instance, the actions of an individual mattered more than the actions of an entire army. It doesn't surprise me at all that the fundamental nature of wargaming shifted. David Wesely's idea to focus on the actions of the individual, when you take Tolkien into consideration, seems to be the most obvious next step to have taken. Unfortunately, Major David Wesely himself, in his response to my vlog episode, disagreed with my opinion. He stated that Tolkien was not at all an influence in the creation of his Brownstein games. My opinion still stands, though. Even if Tolkien wasn't a factor in the creation of role-playing games, he was at least a factor in them becoming as popular as they did at the time. Gary Gygax changed early D&D to appeal to Tolkien readers. This much is obvious if you look at the old books. Tolkien played a significant role in the genesis of this new hobby. With Dave Arneson now in charge of the group, he begins to seriously create his new Blackmoor's game. That's what it was originally called, Blackmoor's, right? At first they simply use rock, paper, and scissors to determine who wins combats, but at some point they find Gary Gygax and Jeff Perrin's chainmail miniature rules and use those for a short while. They are unsatisfied with these rules, so Dave begins to borrow rules from his naval war games and other rules he simply makes up on his own. During this time, the games are held at the College of St. Thomas in St. Paul. He's also working as a security guard. This is when the group begins to use hit points, armor class, characteristics, and levels. It's also when they begin to delve into the sewers under Blackmoor Castle. These sewer explorations would eventually turn into dungeon explorations. In August of 1969, while Dave was still playing with David Wesely in the Twin Cities, Arneson attended the second Gen Con convention in Wisconsin and met Gary Gygax there for the first time. They began to correspond with one another, and this communication eventually led to their first cooperative effort. It was a set of rules for naval war games entitled Don't Give Up the Ship, and it was first published in a periodical in June of 1971, and then later by Guidon Games and Don Lowry in 1972. It would be published one last time in the TSR product line in 1975. During this year, he graduated from the University of Minnesota History program with a minor in ROTC. Eventually, Dave would join Gary Gygax's Castle and Crusade Society, and in July of 1972, the map for his own Blackmoor game would be included in the great map that the Castle and Crusade Society used for their own games. Blackmoor had become part of Gary Gygax's world. In November of 1972, Gary invited Dave Arneson and his friend David Magari to his home to show him Blackmoor. David Magari also showed him his own game, Dungeon. Gary was amazed by what he experienced. He immediately asked Dave for the rules and soon thereafter received 20 pages of handwritten notes in the mail. I won't go into much detail here about this. If you would like to hear the full explanation, please watch episode 40 of my vlog. I'll just simply state that Dave Arneson's input was largely ignored after those initial 20 pages, and Gary Gygax took full control over the project. Gary had his reasons for doing this, but I won't go into them here. Please see episode 40 for more details. Dave did receive 2.5% royalties for each unit sold, but the game that was eventually produced was very different than what Dave Arneson had envisioned. As the original box set of Dungeons & Dragons came out, Dave was busy working on what would end up being the second supplement to the game. It took him quite a while to produce it, but it was eventually published in 1975. It goes into detail on different variations to the game that Dave Arneson preferred, and it also contains the first adventure module ever produced for Dungeons & Dragons, the Temple of the Frog. The next year, once his supplement Blackmoor was out and available for sale, he actually began to work for TSR as an employee. He was given the title of Director of Research, but he left in November of the same year, though. Why he quit is unsure, but the rumors say that because he was unwilling to take a cut in his royalties, he was demoted to the shipping office. The insult of this being so great that he voluntarily left. Wargaming in general back in the day was a pretty messy hobby. People would often buy games, learn them, change them, and then make new games that use some of the rules from these other published games, right? Everyone borrowed from everyone. Dungeons & Dragons also did this. Many of the rules of our game were originally published in other games. After Dungeons & Dragons was released, though, there were so many people interested in it that many other newer games began to be published that linked themselves to Dungeons & Dragons, either by sharing the rules or calling themselves Dungeons & Dragons compatible. At first no one said anything, but eventually Gary Gygax began to sue these new competitors. In time, the world learned to leave D&D alone, for the most part. In 1977, though, Dave Arneson himself published 2 game aids for Dungeons & Dragons that were not authorized by Gary Gygax and TSR. Both titles were released under different publishers, and Gary chose to not sue. Gary allowed them to be published. But it seems that neither of them ever sold very well. From 1977 to 1979, TSR and Gary Gygax published 3 new books. They were a new version of the game and would be called Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. The rules within these books were so much larger and different from the small books Gary and David first published that Gary decided that he didn't need to pay Dave any royalties on them. These books sold extremely well. At the same time, Dave Arneson was also publishing his own new role-playing game. It was called Adventures in Fantasy, but it was never sold very well. On February 2nd, 1979, Dave Arneson filed his first of what would eventually be 5 lawsuits against Gary Gygax and TSR. Gary won his first lawsuit against TSR in March of 1981. With this decision and the 4 others that followed, Gary was able to enjoy a 6-figure salary over the next 20 years. Good for him. Word to the wise, don't tick off the DM. During the 1980s, there were big financial problems at TSR that eventually led to Gary Gygax being bought out and leaving the company. For more details on this, please see episode 40 of my blog. Since the beginning of the company, Gary Gygax had been the editor, but at the height of the financial problems and just before he was bought out, for a short while Gary Gygax was made the temporary CEO, until a new and permanent one could be found. During this time, Dave Arneson was invited back, and along with another writer named David J. Ritchie, produced the following 4 modules based on Dave's Blackmoor campaign. A 5th was planned, but when the new CEO took over in 1986, Gary was no longer able to work with TSR. He was able to publish 1 more module, though, a 5th, in this series, perhaps, in the magazine Different Worlds, issues number 42 and 43. The module was called Garbage Pits of Despair. After this time, and after TSR was bought out by Wizards of the Coast and then subsequently Hasbro, many different iterations of his Blackmoor campaign were published for both 3rd and 4th editions of D&D. One more thing about the money. In 1997, Wizards of the Coast bought out TSR, and in order to free the game up from the royalties that would have been owed to Dave, so Wizards CEO Peter Adkison simply paid Dave 1 large lump sum, and Dave agreed to relinquish all of his rights to the game. I'm assuming that this sum was not small, so congratulations, Dave. He also became a college professor during the 1990s, working for Full Sail University in Winter Park, Florida. He taught game design there. He would work there until just a few years short of his death on April 7th, 2009. I wish I had more I could say about the guy. I found a few more things out about his life. He had served a mission for this church in the 1980s. The church he was affiliated with was The Way International. I'd love to know where he served and how long he served. I also heard that he had done some work with handicapped children while he was living in California. I'd love to hear more about that as well. He was married just once and never divorced. He had 1 daughter. I just get the feeling there's a lot more about him that it would be nice to know. His daughter said one interesting thing about him. I'm just going to read from the homepage that I showed you earlier in the episode. It's just a quote by his daughter, Malia Weinhagen. The biggest thing about my dad's world is that he wanted people to have fun in life. Okay, so I did all the biography stuff on Dave I'm going to do, but I did want to just show some of the books I have of his. I'm not a rich guy. I have a few. That one was a little expensive, so was that one. These were a little expensive, but this represents pretty much everything he did with TSR and for Dungeons and Dragons. It'd be nice to get that 1 module he did that was published in the Different Worlds magazine. I might pick that up someday. I don't know. The one thing I've noticed about a lot of his stuff is it's high power stuff, But anyway, I'm going to go through all this 1 by 1, and I'll point out some things that I thought was interesting, and you'll just have to forgive me because I don't know all this stuff very well. I haven't run through most of it, but I can certainly show it to you. So we've looked through these before in episode 5, I believe, right? So Gary Gygax is the one who did most of the writing for this. Dave Arneson shipped off 20 pages of notes at the very beginning after he showed Blackmoor to Gary at the very first, and then Gary more or less just took off and did all the rest of it on his own. And they're cool little books. They really did start something big. But Dave himself actually didn't have a lot to do with what was written here. Mostly because Gary just ignored him, which is too bad. It's too bad that Gary had the pressure on him to go fast. And it's too bad those two were so far apart. a couple 100 miles from Wisconsin to St. Paul. So, but anyway, this is where it all started. I don't have the wood grain box, I've got the white one. And then in 1977, Dave published this thing all on his own. And it wasn't at all affiliated. It wasn't at all affiliated with TSR, so it's actually kind of cool that Gary didn't sue him. But all it does is just go through these books, and every time they talk about a spell, or every time they talk about a monster, he puts an entry in here so that if you need to look something up, you can look it up in here. My personal opinion is that's a pretty handy thing to have around. If I was doing nothing but old D&D, this is what I'd want one of these. This is the second supplement that they made for D&D. It's just Blackmoor. I guess in here there's two new classes, the monk and the thief, I think it was. But anyway, he describes those two classes, but he also does some things to explain how he chooses to play the game differently than Gary did, I believe. But then he also goes through his own setting of Blackmoor. It's a nation and a city, and there's a module in here. Someday I'm going to do this. I'm just looking forward to getting players who want to go through it. Looks like it's a lot of fun. Anyway, Blackmoor, this is the first iteration, right? But then he came back again in 1977. So, like, this was published in 1975. 2 years later, he came out with this. And this was after he had been fired by TSR. And he made this with the help of Judges Guild. Judges Guild was the one who published it. Egg of Coot. Egg of Coot. I've been seeing that my whole life. I'm really looking forward to getting into this campaign someday. It's going to be a lot of work, though. There's a lot of information here. It also came with a couple of big maps. So, let's see. I believe this is the one for the players, and this is the one for the DMs. I'll just show you the DM one. It's a 40-year-old book, so I guess I better be careful. I sure would hate to rip it. And then when 3rd edition showed up, this book was published. I think this was 2004. And they just, every time Blackmoor gets published, the details keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's a full-blown campaign. I'd be really, someday I'm going to do this. Do you want to see what Gary's signature looked like? Because I was lucky enough, I bought this off of eBay from some, just eBay, right? Anyway, here's his signature. To Thomas, may the treasure multiply. Dave Arneson, August of 05. And I'm not Thomas. I feel kind of bad for Thomas, actually, but that's his signature. And then in 1986, while Gary Gygax got to be temporary CEO for a while, he invited Dave back to publish another version of Blackmoor and then the Temple of the Frog. So these two together have in them an expanded view of this one, right? So let's take a look. Came with a big map. I scanned it in so I could print it out in a single sheet of paper. It's a little hard to read. It's a little hard to read. Let's take a look inside. The Blackmoor Hostel. And I come back in. All these 4 adventures, they're all for levels, character levels 10 to 14. Which makes me really curious. What does Gary do with his first and second level guys, you know? Temple of the Frog. There's just so much complexity to this stuff. It's a campaign that's been going on for 40 years. I mean, at this time it was only around for, what would that be, 10 or so years? But still, it became a very complex thing. My friend Fred Funk, he was actually in this campaign. The Temple of the Frog. Looks fun. And then these 2 modules came out in 1987. This would be like the last module that Gary would do for TSR, City of the Gods. I scanned in all the maps so I could print it out single page. So I don't know anything about this David Ritchie guy, but honestly speaking, it looks like he got to have a chance to have a lot of fun. Last one, Duchy of 10. This is the one Dave Arneson himself wasn't involved in. Just David J. Ritchie, but I'm going to show it anyway. Once again, big map. So anyway, there's just one more thing I had noticed. It's just about this book right here, right? It's a little bit strangely sized. I mean, it's not as big as these. It's not as big as his the first fantasy campaign, right? And it's a lot bigger than these. This is just pure conjecture. Why would he choose that particular size? Wouldn't it have been better to make them the same size as those books right there? Anyway, this is just conjecture. I'll show you my opinion. Okay, so this is all the stuff that you're supposed to have when you play the game, right? So, if you look on page 5 of your Men and Magic book, it lists everything that you're supposed to have in order to play this game, right? I made a copy so we don't have to touch the book too much, but the first thing it says is Dungeons and Dragons, right? And we got that. So let's start packaging all this up, right? This is what it would be like if you were a guy at the time going out to play. The next thing on the list, outdoor survival. And we're going to figure out today why we're supposed to have outdoor survival with this. And this is just my opinion, so bear with me. Next, we're supposed to have dice. So here's what they recommend that you have, okay? 1 pair of 4-siders, a pair of 8-siders, a pair of 12-siders, a pair of 20-siders. There was no 10-siders back then. And then 4 to 20 sets of 6-siders. Chainmail. Lots of 6-siders, right? So there's your dice. And then you're also supposed to bring chainmail with you, and then a whole bunch of little stationery, paper, pen, ruler, sorts of goods, right? So now I've got everything I need, right? After 1974, after 1975, right? A few other things show up, right? So and that makes for a really full box, right? I mean, the box is extremely full right now. We'll flip things around so it fits in a little bit better. But it's a very full box. All right? You can fit everything in there, but it bulges out a little bit. So, outdoor survival. Why did they want you to bring outdoor survival? The thing is, if you're going to be playing Dungeons & Dragons, you're not actually going to be playing it with any of this stuff right here. This is all for that game. The only reason why you would bring outdoor survival is so you can use it with the map, right? This is with the map where all the traveling occurs, right? So that's what you do. This is really the only part of outdoor survival you actually need to bring with you when you play. So let's put everything in the box, right? And then you put in one of your maps, and then your Dungeon Master's Index, and then the other half of the map. And you have a carrying case that you can carry all your stuff in. I think that's why Dave made the Dungeon Master's Index that size. It's just my opinion. So anyway, that's all I have to say about Dave Arneson. He seemed to be a nice guy. It would have been nice to get to know him a little bit. Before I go, I just want to mention something quickly. It's been over a year since I've put up any episodes. Luckily I had some time this month, so I was able to clean this one episode up and put it up again. I don't have time to do this like I used to, though. I have other things going on in my life now that demand my attention. My main reason for doing the vlog was as advertising for the books I have for sale on Lulu. I haven't really seen a bump in sales from it, though. I also haven't monetized this channel. It's my intention to never monetize it. My opinion is that players shouldn't have to have salesmen nipping at their heels every time they try to enjoy their hobby. So, it's a freebie for you. Congratulations. If you're feeling grateful, please consider checking out the books I have at Lulu, or you can still simply just make a donation to my PayPal email address, johnsdndvlog@gmail.com. The more support I get, the higher support I can give the channel. If I can get enough support, you can expect more module reviews. I personally would love to do an episode or two on Ravenloft or the Tomb of Horrors. There's a lot I would still love to do. Support me, and perhaps I'll be able to do them. Anyway, thank you all very much. I'm glad I was able to make something that people seem to enjoy. Have good games. Have a great week. Have a nice day.